everybody. I'd like to introduce you to psychologist, professor, and researcher. Dr. Tony Vernon is the former editor-in-chief of the scientific journal Personality and Individual Differences and formerly sat on the editorial board of the journalism journal Intelligence and the board of directors of the International Society of the Study of Individual Differences. He was also elected president of this society in 2001 and served a 2-year term. Having taught at the University of Western in Ontario for over 30 years, Dr. Vernon is currently teaching at Mount Royal University in Alberta. Dr. Vernon has researched intelligence and mental abilities, as well as personality and individual differences. And a lot of his research has been done with adult twins. So welcome, Dr. Vernon, and thank you for jumping on board with this mini-series of mine where we open dialogue about your field of expertise with the intention to share valuable information to people of all walks of life. So let's start by unraveling your motivation around your most current published research on twins. First of all, what can research tell us about twins?
So a little background. There are two basic types of twins, identical twins and fraternal twins. And identical twins are called identical because they share 100% of their genes. So they are genetically identical. Fraternal twins only share about 50% of their genes. So in our studies, we get samples of identical and fraternal twins, and we give them some tests, maybe a personality questionnaire or a measure of intelligence or mental abilities. And then we look at how similarly the identical twins and the fraternal twins score relative to each other. And to the extent that the identical twins score more alike, more similarly than fraternal twins, that implicates genetic factors being influenced in creating individual differences in the behaviors that we're looking at. And so our twin studies, and it's not just me, there's numerous twin researchers around the world, we're trying to tease apart the relative contributions of genetic and environmental factors to creating individual differences between people.
Oh, wow. Okay, so wait a second, but aren't the environments of identical twins also more alike than the environments of the fraternal twins? So might there not be more similarities of environments that make the identical twins actually score more?
Yeah, that has been raised. In twin research, there's something that's called the equal environments assumption. And that is the assumption that the environments of identical twins and fraternal twins are in fact equally similar. Now, some people have challenged that by saying, well, clearly parents of identical twins treat them more similarly. They dress them the same way, they give them cute similar names like Candy and Mandy or Cindy and Mindy. And that may be true, but there's also been a couple of really interesting studies that have looked at the equal environments assumption and have shown that even if it is violated, even if the parents of identical twins do tend to treat their identical twin siblings, children more alike, that doesn't actually have any effect. So here's one really interesting study. Identical twins, of course, look identical. Fraternal twins typically are no more alike physically than any non-twin siblings. But once in a while, you'll find a pair of fraternal twins who actually do look very, very much alike. So much alike that everyone, including their parents and the twins themselves, believe that they're actually identical twins. And as such, their parents treat them sometimes more similarly than they might if they had fraternal twins who didn't look alike. Now flash forward some 20 years, and these look-alike fraternal twins who everyone thinks are identical and who have been treated as such, and they come in and they do our tests, and they are no more alike than our fraternal twins who everybody thought were fraternal twins. So being treated more similarly has had no effect on their behavioral similarity. Even more dramatic than that, and we're going to see some pictures, there's a photographer in Montreal, Francois Bruneau, And he has made a habit of finding pairs of people who are completely unrelated, and yet they look uncannily alike, just like identical twins. And a friend and colleague of mine in California, Nancy Siegel, has contacted many of these look-alike strangers and has tested them. And as one might expect, being completely random strangers, they score totally differently. There's just no correlation whatsoever. So looking alike per se really doesn't contribute to behavioral similarity at all.
Wow.
Yeah. That's
so interesting. And there's so many studies that are currently and continuously being done that just really broaden the understanding of it.
Yes.
So I've heard that some of the studies have found some of these pairs of twins that were separated at birth shortly thereafter, and then adopted and raised out into other families.
Yes.
Have you looked at separate twin studies like that at all?
I have not studied identical twins raised apart, but I did find a pair in Ottawa, and I sent them down to Minnesota because at the University of Minnesota there's a very large-scale study of both identical and fraternal twins who were separated at birth and adopted out into different families. So this is a neat story. Husband and wife in Ottawa have a pair of fraternal, well, at that point we didn't know if they were fraternal or not, but had a pair of twin boys. Shortly after birth, Dad says to the mom, "I can't take this, I'm leaving." Mm-hmm. And he abandons her. Well, she has no employment, she has no relatives to help her, so very reluctantly she gives the boys up for adoption.
Wow.
About 2 or 3 weeks later, Dad comes back, swears his undying devotion, would she please take him back into her life? She says yes. And he says, "Well, where are the boys? I want to hug them." And she tells him, "Sadly, I had to give them up for adoption." "Well, do you think the adoption agency still has them?" So they go, and they do, because many people don't want to adopt two children, they only want one. So the twins are still there. So they say, "Well, can we have them back?" And they say, "Well, of course, you're the birth parents." Okay, so now they're growing up, and as they're growing up, it's clear that they are, in fact, fraternal twins. They don't look alike at all. But flash forward to when they're in their 20s, they're both going to university in Ottawa. One goes to Carleton, the other goes to U of Ottawa. And one of them sees one of his friends one day, and the friend says, "Hey, the other day I saw you coming out of the library, and I said, 'Hi,' and you just walked right past me. You must have been really deep in thought." The guy says, "When was this?" He says, "Well, it was just yesterday." He says, No, that wasn't me. I wasn't even on campus yesterday, let alone coming out of the library." The guy says, "Well, that's really weird." Well, this keeps happening quite frequently. Lots of people are saying, "Hey, I saw you and you just ignored me. What's with that?" And so he realizes there must be a real lookalike somewhere on this campus. And eventually, these two lookalikes get together, and it blows them away because they are so clearly identical twins.
Right.
They actually have DNA testing, which proves it. So they are ecstatic that they found each other. But of course, the third guy, the fraternal twin, he's pretty upset because he now realizes this isn't my brother. These aren't my parents. Who am I? He actually went into a bit of a depression for a while. But I heard about these identical twins shortly after they had met each other for the first time. Told Tom Bouchard, the director of the Minnesota Twin Study, he brought them down to Minnesota, and there we go. So that's my small contribution to studies of twins reared apart.
Wow. So just out of curiosity, what do some researchers do in regards to finding these twins? Like, is there some kind of database that you go to? Is there somebody you could call?
No, it's often just word of mouth. The very first pair of twins in Bouchard's Minnesota study were the Jim twins. And they were found pretty much at random. And why are they called the Jim twins? Because even though they were separated at birth into different families, each set of adoptive parents, by fluke, chose to call their son Jim. So they were both the Jim twins. And that was just the first of a whole series of uncanny coincidences that went through the Jim twins' lives. For example, they both married a woman called Linda. They both divorced their Linda and then married a woman called Betty.
Oh my gosh.
Both Jim twins had sons. One called his son James Allen with one L. The other called his son James Allen with two L's. They both smoked the same brand of cigarettes. They both drank the same brand of beer. They both liked car racing, and uncharacteristically for an American, they both disliked baseball. One summer, before they had met, they each independently decided to take a vacation in Florida. They both selected the same small resort town. They didn't actually stay in the same hotel, but their hotels were within 3 blocks of each other, so they could easily have just run into each other at a restaurant or walking on the beach. They didn't. But there you go.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So there's no actual gene that actually...
Probably not.
Probably not, right?
No, but we do know that people's interests are somewhat genetically influenced, and so the choice of beer, the choice of cigarettes and so forth could fall under that.
Interesting. So in regards to your study, were the twins raised together by their birth parents?
Yes, all of our twins were raised together. However, some of our twins are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, so they've actually not been living together for quite some period of time.
So what are some of the most interesting things that you've discovered?
So in the realm of personality, let me just give a little background.
Yeah.
A very popular theory about personality is called the Big Five. It identifies 5 major components of personality: openness to new experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion versus introversion, and neuroticism versus emotional stability. So I and many others have studied the Big Five personality traits, and the consistent result is that individual differences in the Big Five are about 50-50 attributable to genetic factors and what are called non-shared environmental factors. That refers to things which one twin in a pair experiences that his or her co-twin does not experience. So we've seen from the twin studies where the twins were raised apart that being raised apart had basically no effect on their being just as similar as twins reared together. So it's these non-shared environmental factors, which have been very hard to identify what they are, but they make the largest contribution.
Wow.
And so that's probably one of our main findings. You can also look at the relationship between 2 or more behaviors or personality traits. And through genetic studies, you can say, okay, let's say we found 2 traits that correlate 0.5. So why is there a correlation there? Is it because those genes that contribute to the one variable are the same genes that contribute to the other variable? And or are there environmental factors that contribute to both? And our studies, and again, those of others, have found that in most cases where there is a correlation, it's mostly due to correlated genes and to a lesser extent to correlated environments.
So something that just popped into my head that I'm kind of curious about is the nature versus nurture debate.
Right.
Is there anything from these twin studies that have basically given a little bit of light on...
Totally, yes. The whole nature versus nurture debate, and indeed it was quite a controversial debate back in maybe the 1960s or so, was based on a false premise. It shouldn't be nature versus nurture. What my and other twin studies have shown is that both are pretty much 50-50 equally important. So it should be nature and nurture. They're both important.
Okay, noted. So before we wrap things up,
yes,
out of your knowledge and expertise, where do you think and where do you foresee twin study research really going?
So the next step is what's referred to as molecular genetic research, and that is trying to identify specific genes which code for different behaviors. And so far, the research there is very much in its infancy. So someone may publish an article saying, we believe that one gene that codes for depression is such and such a gene on chromosome 18. And then other researchers will try to replicate that, and 99% of the time they fail to replicate. So one reason is that many behaviors, well, take intelligence, for example, it's very likely that intelligence is influenced by hundreds of genes, each one exerting a tiny influence. And so to try to identify something which has such a small effect, you have to have very powerful designs, which means you have to have thousands and thousands and thousands of participants. And they don't necessarily have to be twins. That would be great. But so far, most of the studies have been quite small, and it's probable that they just don't have the power, the statistical power to detect the influence of such tiny little effects.
Wow, it'll be very interesting to see
will.
how things kind of come about.
It really will.
Well, Tony, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to kind of wrap up our discussion today, or anything else?
Sure. I mean, to my mind, in psychology in particular, because that's my area, I think everybody should be doing twin studies, because twin studies can do anything that a non-twin study can do, and so much more.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.